Welcome back, everybody, to the Modern Farming Podcast. Thanks for being with us, where we bring you insights directly from the field about food, agriculture, and the incredible environment we live in. You know, every week, Brad and I say the same thing. We are extremely excited to be on with you and bring a guest. This week's no different. Actually, the next 2 weeks, we are extremely excited about both of our guests, and especially today, we have with us Jon Lundgren, who is a former entomologist with the USDA. He now runs a nonprofit foundation, Ecdysis, which you've probably heard of in the Thousand Farm Initiative, also at Blue Dasher Farms. You know, every time Brad and I talk about who's the next guest or who should we have on, usually I come up with a really cool list of people, and Brad's like, yeah, hey, I know him. And so here we are. Jon was no different. So Jon, thank you very much for being with us. And we're looking really forward to the next couple of weeks here.
Hey, Jon, it's good to see your face.
Here, guys. Thanks for giving me some time. Yeah, likewise. Been a while.
So, Jon and I met about 8 years ago at a grass-fed beef conference, and we stayed in touch over the years. And as I was doing some trials and research, he'd help me with my pest problems and talk me off the ledge when I thought I needed to spray something. And but anyway, he's doing a lot of good things in the industry. I know you just love to tell your story, Jon, but I think we need to start there. Most of our listeners probably don't know who you are, so why don't you just start us off with that, if you don't mind?
Yeah, you bet. So I'm a scientist by training, an entomologist. I worked for the USDA for around 11 years or something like that, and did everything right according to, we all have those things that we check, all of those boxes we check to see that we're, productive within our field and stuff like that. And very few people had better stats than I did within science, and certainly agricultural science. But I could drive from my house over to the Twin Cities where my folks lived. I'm based in South Dakota, and things weren't getting better. In science, we talk about changing. We need to change our food system, or the health system, and all of these things. Well, a lot of facets of science or society needs to change, and science is one of those things. And so I quit my job with the federal government, and I went out and started something totally different, thinking that if we need science in order to help agriculture, then those scientists actually need to walk the talk. They need to actually get their hands dirty in solving these problems firsthand. And so I bought the farm, literally, and that was about 9 years ago now. And Ecdysis is our nonprofit that we use for conducting science across the country, working with regenerative agriculture, and all of the scientific staff at Ecdysis has to help on Blue Dasher Farm. It changes everything when you do that, right? It changes your questions we ask and how we ask them. So in a nutshell, that's kind of who I am and what brought me in front of you guys today.
Yeah, you have a pretty large staff too, I think.
Yeah, we've got up to 45 now, depending on the time of year. And then we go all over the place, right? The Thousand Farms Initiative is our big experiment at this point, where we're looking at different food production sort of philosophies across North America. And so we've been working in about 35 different cropping systems, as well as maybe 6 or 7 livestock systems across North America, and visited 1,300 farms to date. And it's really one of the first times that I think certainly a scientific team has kind of gotten to have this firsthand experience, pretty intimate experience with a nation's food system like this.
And I've heard you say, you're gonna go where the science takes you. You're just taking data, and whatever it says, but almost every time it shows where you're taking care of the soil and biodiversity, that those are the profitable farms.
By far and away the most resilient farms, and honestly the happiest farmers are the ones that are focusing on growing life on their farms, and that just that produces so many of these outcomes like carbon and water and economic profit and better tasting and more nutritious food. It's just like, I've been working in science for a long time, and it's pretty rare when you get a consistent result across so many different facets of an ecosystem. And this is real clear. This is the answer moving forward.
I've heard you say in the past, we don't have a pest problem, we have a soil problem, that most of our issues are going to be related to the soil.
Yeah.
Keeping living roots and building carbon and minimizing biological disturbances. It all relates to the quality of our food and the end product.
Yeah, for sure. And that kind of speaks to how science is done right now. A lot of times is we like to, and farming too often as well, is we like to silo different issues. Oh, I got this pest problem, right? I better, buy an insecticide in order to kill that pest. The reality is that pests are never the problem. They are always a symptom. And until you solve that underlying root cause or that problem, you're going to continue to have to buy jugs in order to control pest problems in your field, diseases and things like this. So and science does the same thing. I was hired by the USDA to be a soybean entomologist in eastern South Dakota. There was no way I was ever going to solve the soybean aphid problem. It was never an entomology problem to begin with. The soybean aphids were a problem because the soil was screwed up. And until you solve that, you're going to continue to lose money as a farmer.
I have a question. So Eastern South Dakota, pretty rough growing country, right? Usually hot, dry, don't really have that deep black soil that you get as you move east. When you say the soil was the culprit, for our listeners that might not be in agriculture, how do we convey that if the soil was the challenge or the soil was the problem, why does that affect how pests attack a plant?
Oh, good question. So an unhealthy soil often has, reduced organic matter, reduced fertility, and increased synthetic chemicals within it, and so as we eliminate biodiversity and life from our farms, we have to replace all of the things that life did within that farm in order to drive the productivity of the system with a jug. And it doesn't matter whether it says regenerative or organic or has a skull and crossbones on it. Those jugs all do one thing, and that is they replace what life used to do for free. And so within a damaged soil, what ends up happening is we think we're so darn smart, and we've got, the chemical answer to keeping those plants healthy and happy. When in reality, those plants don't want to grow in a monoculture, and they don't want to grow in a soil that's devoid of life. And so they get sick, and that doesn't mean that their productivity, you might still get banger yields, but those are still, that's because we've selectively bred for crop plants that can still put on a pod when they're sick. And so all of these pest problems suddenly move in, and we can spray out the insect pest today or whatever, but it's it's going to figure out, the insects are so much smarter than we are. All the diseases are so much smarter than we are. And so we have to give our crops and our livestock a leg up in order to be able to defend themselves and work as they used to within a healthy system.
Yeah. I love that. We talk a lot about replacing Mother Nature's systems to one, to turn a profit, right? I think the biggest challenge for a lot of people, especially consumers and whatnot, is to understand that there's a whole lot of people getting paid to prescribe these inputs, to prescribe these solutions. I myself have been paid for solving problems with a 2.5 gallon jug, or prescribing a prescription to go and hit a field and take care of a pest. And I think, sometimes the consumer will listen to us, and they'll listen to you, and they know what's healthy and what's not. And they say to themselves, why? If John, who used to work for the USDA, and all of your expertise, all of your knowledge, if this guy, along with many others, is saying that we can do this without it if we just focus on soil health, to the average mom and dad, soccer mom and dad, or whoever who isn't in the ag field, what they're saying to themselves is, why isn't everybody doing it? And the one pushback we get a lot of times on this side of the fence, as consultants or crop consultants like Brad and I, is, well, that stuff doesn't work, or it's too expensive to implement that type of system on my farm. So I wanted to ask you, like, where's the break-even point? Is it that much harder? Is it that much more expensive for growers to implement this type of system? And if so, how do we overcome that barrier? Is it help from the government? Is it help from this consumer packaged goods folks? Or is it a brain barrier? Do we have a cerebral connection to the prescription of ag?
Yeah. Well, that's the $1 million question. I think number one. Okay, let's look at the data. We've looked at data across the country at this point. We've got about 1,000 profit loss analyses on different management systems across the country. You do not lose money going regenerative. The data does not support that. And so you make just as much. Oftentimes, some of the most profitable farms and highest yielding farms are regenerative. The problem is that oftentimes the lowest performing farms are also regenerative. And so you tend to have bigger error bars the more regenerative you get. And that's part of that is inherent in where we are in the adoption of regenerative. And part of that is also inherent in the behavioral mechanisms that are driving the regenerative movement right now. So if you can make the most money and the most profit, or the highest yields, why doesn't all of the regenerative farmers do that? And the reality is that there's a lot of different currencies in this world, and profit and economics are just one of them. And so what's driving the conventional producers, when we ask about their motivators, it's things like economic profits. It's the perceived profitability, because it's not actually more profitable. It is yields. It is acquiring that next parcel of land, and things along those lines. When you ask the regenerative farmers that same question, yeah, profit is in there. That's important. But what's disproportionately in there is the mental and physical wellness of their families. And I think that that's a really strong motivator right now. Environmental stewardship. A growing portion of the human population in North America right now, we can't eat wheat. All right. the gluten intolerance has gotten to the point, and that's a direct result of how we're growing our wheat crop. I mean, the chemistries and stuff. And if farmers knew, okay, well, what you're growing right now, or the way that you're growing it is actually, I mean, you're proud of producing food for your community. We can't eat that anymore. More and more people can't eat that. I think that that would resonate with them, right? I think that we need to start understanding the impacts of our management decisions. And it wasn't intentional that we got where we are right now, right? But I think that we do need to open our eyes and we need to start making change. The other element to that question is, I mean, how do we change? Well, farmers in my area are borrowing $850,000 a year to make $50,000 a year. And they stopped asking the question of where that other $800,000 is going. Right now in our society, farmers they are being milked by the agro industry for everything that they're worth. Their kids are sick. Their families are sick. Their communities are sick. They're under crippling debt, multi-generational debt. And it's all for these large corporations just to maximize their corporate profits. And it's wrong. It is wrong what's happened right now. I want to keep that money on the farm. Regenerative ag does that.
Yeah, and I know I've heard on those broadacre farms that when they make good money and the price per bushel goes up, the input costs go up. And then when they make less money, the input costs go down.
Yeah, these corporations have it all dialed in. So it's like, even when you do have a good year, you don't have that good of a year.
Yeah, it's really amazing. Like I said, I mean, I was part of the complex, right? I worked for a very large cooperative for many years. I worked for Syngenta for many years. I've worked for countless people in between, and it seems like the grower is just dishing out in so many ways, and they don't even know where that's all going. Now, on our end, we're selling to them based on an acre and a profit per acre, and they're whittling us down on every ounce, right? Like they need a lower cost per ounce for every acre, and that's kind of how the math is done there. But as a whole, holistically, you look at a grower and all the things that they are managing. Brad and I talk about it all the time on this podcast. Is the challenge with being a grower is that you're everything. You've got to be the scientist, you got to be the scout, you got to be the electrician, you got to be the mechanic, you got to be the accountant, you got to be the janitor, you got to be everything, and also got to be husband, wife, mom, and dad. And it really is kind of scary, and gotten even more scary here more recently. You talk about trade and things like that, the global economics of agriculture. Do you think that, and sorry, Brad, I'm just jumping all over these questions. I know you probably have 100, but do you think that there is a point where, this series we're doing right now is called Dirt to Table, Dirt to Dinner. And what we really want to focus on is how is our food actually going from the field to our table, and what's all involved in that. And at the end of it, what are we getting out of it as nutrition? What are us humans actually getting for all the industry that agriculture supports, for all of us who are part of that complex, the research, the sales, the machines, the farms, the real estate, everything that's part of that, which is its own economy. And it's a huge driver of the US economy and the world economy. GDP for farming around the world that's what keeps this world going. And so in your conversations with all the growers you've had, top to bottom, east to west, do you think that there is a way for growers to get paid for the nutritional output versus the tons in the bin?
I think it starts with knowing your customers. I think it starts with growing food for your community and your family and eating what it is that you're producing. I think that when you start to focus, we were out in a blueberry field. All right, North Carolina, we're out sampling. It's hot, right? It was a U-pick operation. It was an organic regenerative blueberry orchard. Absolutely beautiful. The old gentleman was there. It was a Sunday. They were closed. There was a guy that pulled up. I'm like, oh, what's he doing? And he's like, oh, he just likes to come out. Then he picks. I'm like, oh, all right, sounds good. And by the time we were done sampling, the whole orchard was filled with families that were growing it with their kids. They were all picking food, right? And I was on soils. It was hot. I was tired. I went over and I sat next to the old gentleman who's the farmer. And he's like, come a little closer, John, on his rocking chair on his porch. And I'm like, okay, I got to hear this. He's like, John, it's not about the money. Grow food for your community. You take care of the people and the money is going to come. That is a much different economic model than the one that is completely railroaded our farming communities right now into these international markets. And the commodification of food has come at the huge detriment to our society. Huge detriment. Start local. Start with your family. Start with your community. Grow food you're proud of and that makes them healthier. The money's going to come.
Yeah, and ultimately it takes the entire local economy to get behind that vision, right?
Sure.
Because right now it's, you've got the big corporations, the food manufacturers, the Kellogg's,
Right.
everybody, right? If we name too many names, people will get in trouble. But they're there, right? They're in your grocery store. How do we take that global global system, that complex that everyone talks about, the ag complex, right? How do we take that from being so global to being more local? And where have you seen examples of that? Because I know they exist. We've got a lot of people who we talk to. We know they exist, but I just wanted everyone to hear from you.
Yeah.
Where is this happening, or is it happening, and
Right.
how is it happening?
Geography matters. And that's something that I've had to learn over the last 3 years of the 1,000 Farms Initiative. Regenerative agriculture as a system, as I define it, has been persisting for hundreds of years within geographic pockets around the United States, oftentimes in Appalachia, in areas where it's really tough to get huge trucks in and out as quick as can be. And when the commodification of our food system tends to lend itself towards this, distribution or redistribution of food. And so where does it work? We've seen it working in a lot of communities throughout Eastern North America at this point, and other places as well, where they are growing local food for their communities, where they are, and they're very profitable at it. Hundreds of thousands of dollars per acre they're getting out of these vegetable farms and things like this, orchard systems. But as soon as you start to add in a middleman, maybe it's a food aggregator, it tends to be the end of a food system. Where after, it all sounds great, right? Man, I'm farmer. I'm working my butt off here, and I don't have time to market my products. These fine people are going to come in and they're going to take that, and for a small fee, they're going to market it for me. Looks really good at first. And then every year after that, the profits that go back to the farmer get a little bit smaller, and the prices that go to the consumer get a little bit higher. And the people in the middle, they do just fine. So that distancing of the farmer from the end users of their food and their customers Well, it's come at a huge cost. And that system is breaking right now.
Mm.
That system's breaking.
Yeah, and I know all this is replicable, and you're saying it is scalable. We just start small and move from there.
Yeah,
I mean,
start with the system too. Don't start with, you get a lot of guys that, oh, I'm going to try no-till this year, that kind of a thing. And it's like, oh, yeah, no, that doesn't work all that well. What works is I'm going to take a couple of acres or, depending on the scale of your farming operation, 30 or 40 acres, and adopt a full system. You go no-till.
Right.
Covers, you get the organic amendments in there, you back off of all of the synthetics, you get livestock into that system, then you scale that system up, because I guarantee you once you give it a try,
right,
I mean, farming becomes fun again.
Yeah, no doubt. Yeah, we work with some larger growers, and we take baby steps. We get a cover crop in if it's a perennial crop, and they get that pretty quick. And then if it's a row crop farmer, we try to get a cover crop in the fallow season and just help them to understand, biological disturbances. But it's baby steps. They all want to do it. They all kind of understand it or want to understand it. It's just, what is it going to cost me?
Yeah. Change is hard.
So let me ask you both this question then. So, okay. So if cover cropping, to Jon, like no-till cover cropping, adding these organic inputs, getting off the prescription, are we to the point? Will we ever get to the point? And maybe this is just, I'm just thinking crazy here, but are we going to get to the point where we can prescribe a cover crop to mitigate a certain pest or disease?
I think the answer to that is already in. It's called diversity. You get the plant diversity into a system, and it works in ways that are pretty hard to predict a lot of times, because every farm is a little bit different. But you allow those to start self-sorting, and the more diversity in covers that you end up establishing, generally the healthier the habitat. That doesn't mean that there isn't going to be particular plants that are having the biggest impact on a particular problem. But if we separate out these components as okay, I've got this critter on my field, I better plant this cover crop, then it's really adopting the conventional mindset into a regenerative space. And that doesn't usually produce the results that you're after long term.
Yeah. And I'm just wondering if there's a way to transition, because I think, correct me if I'm wrong, the growers that you talk to about this type of system, what is their initial response? Are they coming to you? Are you going to them? What percentage of them are responsive to it and say, yeah, let's do this, versus that's snake oil?
Well, we just got back from California almonds as one example. We've been studying transitions out there for the last several years. Almonds is in an interesting state. It's probably about where Florida citrus was maybe 20 years ago, where the writing's on the wall. And we've been studying the transition to regenerative. Of the 10 farms that we study, these are very difficult studies to run. You have to revisit them for 5 years annually. And during that 5 years, people change, right? And one of the interesting aspects of it is that the conventionals within our within our fields out there that we've been measuring, they either all adopted regenerative practices because they saw the data, or their orchards are now selling, or the owner is terminally ill with some disease that probably was caused by the farming management practices. I mean, almost to a farm. Those were the outcomes that we observed. We've had thousands of farms across North America register to be a part of the study, that are they fall along a continuum from very conventional to very regenerative. But most often when they sign up for the study, they tend to fall more on the side of the regenerative aspect of it. And, the fact of the matter is that no matter what community we end up going into, there are farmers that are practicing regenerative practices, oftentimes under the radar screen. I mean, you don't have a Will Harris in every community, right?
Right.
But you actually have a Will Harris and you don't even know it usually.
Right.
So it's a matter of bringing people out into the light and showing that this works. Every single place that we've visited, we have found farms that are successfully doing this.
And it'll be the science that proves it, which is,
Yeah.
I mean, the amount of data that you collect and that you have warehoused and that you can just lay out there and show nobody else is doing that. You're the only one that's doing that.
Right. Yeah. It's a pretty unique thing. And there's a reason, is because it's a big pain in the ass, right? I mean, this is hard. What we're doing is hard. But I mean, it's pretty incredible. And the other thing that's kind of interesting is that, this is all grassroots, right? I mean, we end up starting every year. I start at $0 and I have to raise $4 million in order to keep this thing going. And it's happened, right? Through hook and crook and through unseen sources. People have bankrolled this more than 60 a year, every year, at various levels in order to support the inclusion of these farmers in the study. And the data that we're generating as a result of that, my gosh. I mean, this is the answer that we've been looking for. The stories that you hear about regenerative agriculture, they're not just fairy tales.
Mm-hmm.
It's real. If we were to devote the nation's croplands to fully regenerative practices, not only would you increase biodiversity, rural community resilience, you would reduce human health problems, and you would increase the nutrition of food. But if we were to do that, it would also store enough carbon in the soil that is equivalent to 2 years' annual emissions. And that's just the start. If you were to devote rangelands and to fully regenerative production practices, that's more than 5 years of annual emissions, while increasing the nation's beef production. The only way we're going to get out of this is by increasing the number of animals on the land.
Correct.
Yep.
Correct. And that seems to be, you said something earlier about predictability.
Yeah.
I think that's probably the biggest challenge with the system, is that growers, salespeople, organizations, whoever's part of the traditional conventional ag system, we work on a bunch of predictabilities. Matter of fact, we try to eliminate everything that is unpredictable. We try to make it very predictable for the grower to budget, allocate $1 per acre to get a predictable yield. There's a lot that we can't manage, right? We can't control the weather. We can't control soil temperatures. We can't control hailstorms or frost and things like that. But there is a whole bunch of that the system was designed eons ago to eliminate the risk, therefore making it more predictable, that if you do this, we get you this. I can't tell you how many times I showed up at a grower's shop and said, hey, I've got a product and we increased by 5 bushel. We increased by 3 bushel. And one year a guy put out all the papers that I had given him, all the tech sheets that I had given him on his workbench in the shop, which I was always scared. That's where they, that's like the train station, right? Like the shop, no one's around. It's a freezing cold February day in South Dakota. And so he's got all of these tech sheets that I've given him over the 3 years. And he's like, Nick, 4 years ago, you told me if I put these 3 products in, I'd get 3 bushel, 5 bushel, 7 bushel. I didn't get it. 2 years ago, you told me these 3 products give me 3, 4, and 5 bushel. We didn't get it. Now you got these 3 products telling me we're going to get 21 bushel. Why am I believing you? Right. And at that point, I was like, man, this guy's going to do away with me right here. He's going to dig a hole. I'm done. And I said, the challenge is we did everything right? From seed, we chose the right seed. It was the right genetics based on all the data. We got the right seed, we got the right starters, we got all the things that we did right, and we still missed our yield goal. And I think that predictability piece is really where a lot of growers get scared. And I would have to assume that a lot of the brokers, the folks that are moving grain, they get really squeamish when they're not sure how many tons are going to come in. The other part of that is, I don't think many people know that there's like 4 or 5 companies that control the movement of grain around the globe. And when I was in the world of genetic modification and I worked for Syngenta in the research fields, everybody hated on us, right? I had friends in Hawaii who didn't allow me on their farms with my boots because they were afraid I was going to bring Roundup in on my boots. And they outcast me. We were friends before I started working for Syngenta. After that, no way. But what I'm saying is, I think that, we always look at genetic modification as really the bad guy in the room. And no one was looking at the fact that there's very few corporations that are controlling the movement of grain, not just in the United States, but around the globe. And nobody's looking at them as they need to be responsible for some of this. Obesity rates are through the roof. I just saw a study the other day that by like 2050, 50% of the planet will be obese. That is a frightening number considering how many people are living in India and China. That's a scary number, and those folks aren't even developed as we are. So I just wonder, we look at all this. How do we make it more predictable? The data that you're getting, how are you sharing that, and how is that being received by growers and industry?
Boy, there's a lot to unpack there. Number one, your story about 3 bushels. I think that these corporations, they got it all dialed in. They're like, well, if we tell a farmer it's going to get like a 3.5 bushel yield bump, that's great. I was on Twitter and one of my friends was posted. He's like, if I used all of the products that I just got that were going to give me a 3.5 bushel yield bump, I'd be growing 800 bushel corn this year. I'm like, yeah, how about that, huh? Didn't work. As we start to, focus on efficiencies and mitigating risk, it's important that we're living within an ecosystem, right? And that complex ecosystems often have risks that we were not perceiving at first. And so our desires for having the error margins be this big on the amount of yield that we're going to get, and you're going to get this no matter what, and profitability and things like that, sure, those are important aspects of it. But guess what? In order to get that predictability, you had to sacrifice the climate. You had to sacrifice your human health, right? I ask farmers now, they always ask me, what's it going to cost me to change? This regenerative ag thing sounds real good. What's it going to cost me to change? And my response to them is, I think that's the wrong question. What's it going to cost you not to change? It's going to cost you your farm. It's going to cost you your grandkids. Is that worth it? I don't think it is. It wasn't for me. Yeah. You know how scary it was for me to change? I had it all dialed in, guys. I was making a decent salary. I had a cushy federal job that would have taken care of me and my family for the rest of my life. But I could see the degradation around me and things were falling apart. And I think a lot of people see that things are falling apart right now. Is regenerative predictable? Yeah, it is. Is it a different cultural system and a different management philosophy from the conventional mindset? Yeah, it is. And that mental change that has to happen, I mean, we're going to have to get real resourceful. You can't farm a government check. And many of the farmers right now, that's what they're farming for. Whether they make or don't make their yield quotas, as long as they get that government check, they're not going to worry about it. But boy, you wouldn't be growing corn and beans if profit was really your motivator.
Fact.
They're growing things for pennies on the acre. We were out, one of my scientists and I were out there. We were looking at his parents' ground, his dad's ground. He's like, John, this is marginal ground, right? They tilled the shnikes out of it, and they planted corn. That corn's never going to make a dime. I went through it with him. At the end of the year, I looked at all of his inputs and I looked at the yields. He made like $1.50 an acre on this piece of ground. I told him, you could go out there in the middle of that acre and you could plant a single watermelon or pumpkin seed, and you would have made 5 times the amount of money. If profit was the motivator, grow something else. Start integrating systems. Start stacking enterprises. Stop farming the government. Sorry, that's pretty controversial. And I probably have said a number of things that are a little bit, get people shifting in their seats a little. But boy, at the end of the day, I want people to know that, I mean, I'm on your side, right?
Mm-hmm.
That I don't think everybody else is right now. And I think we need to wake up to that.
I love that. We talk about it all the time. Brad and I say it every episode, the same thing. You know, we're really careful on what we say. And I always say the same thing you did earlier. You operate on the best information you have. And for 200 and some odd years, for most growers, the mass majority of them, they were just operating on the best information they had. The best information, the most credible information came from universities.
Yeah.
And then it came from the USDA. And then it was approved by the EPA or the FDA. All these acronyms got people's attention. And so they gave credibility and they trusted a source. I think now that source is being questioned on both sides. It's being questioned by the consumer. Now it's even being questioned by our government. Should we be paying for this type of thing? My concern for a lot of growers today is when someone starts to poke through the farm bill, there's a lot of money in there that I'm not sure if it's going to ever get back to growers at the rate we're going right now.
I don't disagree that we need safety nets for farmers in disaster scenarios. Hell, the hurricanes hitting or the fires burning right now. Mm-hmm. We need to be able to, give people a leg up when they need it. That's a different situation than farming for an insurance check every year. Mm-hmm. The other thing is, you're absolutely right. Science right now, also, I would add to your list, there's a real mistrust. And I think that comes from the disconnect, right? I mean, when I was a professional scientist where that's all, I was within that infrastructure, I was writing science for other scientists. Mm-hmm. I wasn't writing it for the end users of the research, right? And until we started what we did with Ecdysis Foundation and the 1,000 Farms Initiative, we don't know what we're going to find on these farms. We travel all over the country, whether you're conventional, whether you're regenerative, right? We don't know ultimately. That's why we're doing the research. Mm-hmm. But when we leave that farm, that farmer knows that we care about them and we care about their mm-hmm. farm and we care about their family. And that's much different style of science than I was trained to do. And as a result, the relationships that we forge make the data, any data that we collect, stick. Because it's not just, it's more than just somebody that parachutes in, collects the data and leaves. We want to maintain those relationships. And the people are so important in this story. Take care of your community, right?
Yeah. And I've seen that with you firsthand when you were down here last year. It was pretty amazing.
I've texted with Chip quite a few times over the last year. He's always got something pretty neat to say, and there's been a few folks that we've been able to.
I'm glad you got to meet him.
Yeah, me too. Boy, what a treasure!
And this Green Gene Foundation, I mean, that's kind of the goal for this foundation, is to expose and educate our kids to this kind of science. I mean, that's where it starts. Awesome. The average age of our farmer now is in his upper 50s, and that's going up every year. And we're in trouble.
Yep, time for change. Well, how do you keep those kids on the farm? You give them, sometimes I feel like, driving in a combine is like being in a cubicle on wheels. You're just working for somebody else. There's not a ton of creativity that has to go into that at this point. But when you're raising livestock and fruit production and grains or whatever, all integrated at once, suddenly that becomes, my gosh, I could tell you firsthand. I mean, it sounds crazy, but it's a spiritual experience to be on a farm where you're in charge it just touches you in ways that it's hard to put into all those billboards that you see on the side of the freeway. Those are real when you're on a regenerative farm. They're not real when they're on a big, industrialized model farm. But
Well, okay. Well, so let's do this. We could probably talk. I know we could talk for hours about, and we unpacked a lot here. There's a lot that we say that is very politically charged, right? The corporations that are behind a lot of our food and our foodstuffs. Look, these people. No one's bad. Like there's no bad entity here. There are some bad actors within the entities. I think what we're all trying to say, and what we try to say every episode, is there is another way. There is an alternative. And whether you call it organic, regenerative, natural, whatever the term is, there is another way. And I think that for so long, there hasn't been enough data or really good, credible data or even good, credible products that might help somebody move the needle from one system to the other. They do exist. Ecdysis is a perfect example of how this data is collected and how the proof is there. You can do it for another 10 years. The proof isn't going to change. It's there. Diversity and different systems that exist on one farm are the way we're going to get a healthier human. And I think that the thing we stress here every week is just that. How do we show the world, or at least our community or this country or whoever listens to our podcast? That's our goal, is to show them that there is another system. And you said it, Jon, there are people within your or in your community that you could find that if you did a little bit of research, reach out to any one of us. The podcast itself, there's a page on our web page that you can just hit the podcast button. Send us an email. If you're looking for someone in your community, we could probably help you do that. But it will take the consumer, I believe, the consumer to really drive this thing, because the system is set up. The system has made a lot of people wealthy. The system is dominated by lobbyists in Washington, D.C. that make these things happen. So behind that beautiful little farmer's market looking thing in your grocery store, no matter what state you're in, they've all changed. The grocery store looks like a farmer's market, right? They want you to feel like you're right on the farm, and that ear of corn just came from John's backyard in South Dakota. It probably didn't. And a lot of times it came from another country. And that's all because there's a system behind it. And I think if people will reach out, if they will find these people who are doing it in their community, I think we'll change there. So let me land the plane here. What are you doing, Jon? Ecdysis is doing, or Blue Dasher Farm. What is the most exciting thing you got going in 2025?
We're starting to pilot. So, we've been deploying teams out to these farms for the last 3 years, and we've gotten to meet a lot of farmers that way. We'll continue doing that, but we need to extend the reach of what it is that we're doing far beyond that if we're going to move the needle. And so we're developing a system where we can actually recruit farmers as citizen science and send them kits of all of our research materials, hopefully for free, so that they can measure their own farms and then input the data or samples into our system, and it can spit it out into a contextualized format so that they can see, okay, somebody else in your area, this is where you're at in terms of, say, organic matter or something along those lines in your soil. So-and-so or somebody down in your community tried cover crops this year or grazing those covers, and it seemed to increase their organic matter. It might give you an opportunity, and then even possibly the social threads would start to kind of get forged there in ways that we can extend 1,000 farms to the 1 million farm initiative or something.
That's cool.
Yeah. We're pretty excited about that. We'll be piloting that probably in a couple of regions this year.
Awesome. How do people learn more about you or Ecdysis or your foundations?
Go to our website, www.ecdysis.bio. You can find all of our most recent blogs and research places. It also has kind of a running tally of where we're at that particular moment. And you follow us on social media.
Awesome. Jon, it was wonderful to meet you. I'm so glad Brad's got the connection with you to be able to bring you on here. We hope in the future we can get you back on. I know our listeners are kind of new. This is like episode 11, so we're just getting started here, but I know people are going to have questions, and hopefully we can get you back on as well.
I'd love that. Yeah, let's do it.
Right on. Well, thank you very much. Thank you. Yeah, thanks everybody for joining us on the Modern Farming Podcast. Like I said, if you want to learn more, if you haven't jumped on our website yet, it's thegreengenefoundation.org. And if you click on that podcast button, you can hit the subscribe button, which is going to let you know when the next episode is aired. So be sure to listen to this episode and the next episode. As Jon alluded, we have another incredible guest who's going to talk a lot about animal farming, raising cattle, and the things he's done on his farm. Just incredible. So thanks for being with us again, Jon. Brad, thanks for bringing Jon along.
Bye now. Thank you.
Take care.